When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife and bore him a son. But the Lord was displeased with what David had done. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said, "There were two men in the same city. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds, and the poor man had only one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He tended it, and it grew up together with him and his children. It used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup, and nestle in his bosom. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler came to the rich man, but he was loath to take anything from his own flocks and herds to prepare a meal for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. David, he flew into a rage against the man and said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He shall pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and showed no pity." And Nathan said to David, "That man is you. Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who anointed you king over Israel, and it was I who rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house in possession of your master's wives, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that were not enough, I would give you twice as much more. Why then have you flouted the command of the Lord and done what displeases him? You have put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife and made her your wife, and had him killed by the sword of the Ammonites. Therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife. Thus said the Lord, I will make calamity rise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes, and he shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. You acted in secret, but I will make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight." David said to Nathan, "I stand guilty before the Lord." The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. I happened to see an interesting study this past week. And the study was about branding, right? So brands like you see in the picture. And why would I be talking about brands in response to David's revelation today about how wrong it was of what he did with Bathsheba and Uriah? Well, that study about brands was about how devoted we are to brands of products. We tend to become so devoted to certain brands that our worldviews and behaviors get influenced very easily according to whatever direction our favorite brands, businesses, organizations, whatever ways that they go, because they become so much a part of us. The study, and this was really cool, the study involved brain scans. And so they were watching signals in the brain. And what they found out is that the signals we get in our brains when it comes to stuff like family, defending our family, or something like that, it's the very same signals from the same place that come up, that happen when we're defending our favorite brands. So long story short, it's like our favorite brands become something like family to us. Something like support networks to us. They become a part of our actual identity. It's so weird. Skeptical? Well, obviously I can't say whether this is an absolute fact or not. It's a very interesting study. But just look at how you feel about your favorite brands. The brands to which you are most loyal. Right, one standout that I think of is in the cell phone world, the Apple versus Android thing, right? Have you ever witnessed, participated in Apple versus Android arguments? It's an endless stream of brand loyalists on each side defending their brands to the death, just like how we might defend our families. And then take this into the automotive world, right? Ford versus Chevy. Now, we've had fun with that lively discussion quite a bit here, and then even get some Dodge loyalists in there, and then we have fun with that, right? Now, I remember it was fun when I was shopping for a truck, and all the Ford loyalists were hoping I was going to get a Ford. The Chevy loyalists were hoping I was get a Chevy, and the Dodge loyalists come in hoping I'm going to get a Dodge, and then I make everybody unhappy by getting a Honda. Or remember when I first got here, another fun one. One of the very first questions I got when I met with the congregation as a whole, if you remember this, IU or Purdue? And right from there, I had fun sitting on the fence with you all, and I said IUPUI. These days, we have fun with it. And I love the love in this community where we can have fun with this stuff. And it gets a whole lot more serious than that, too. It's these days probably the biggest divide among us, and as Americans, is the politics thing, the whole liberal versus conservative thing, and which comes with brands. A donkey and an elephant. These are definitely brands, just in the political world. Think about where we come from with this stuff. With some of the other things as well. And we're often born into the brands that we're loyal to. Taught from a very young age which side is good and which side is bad. Sometimes our devotion to certain brands might be so strong that they can cause rifts in the family. And and it's not just business, it's not even just politics, but even in religion as well. We have brands on our religions, right? We've got a cross, there's and then other religions have, and so that's just thinking about the brand of Christianity versus these other brands of religions. And then you look within Christianity, we got like 30,000 brands of our own just inside Christianity. It's so much branding, and then that sticks us against each other. So we're talking about this in Fellowship of Churches. It's one of the big things we've always wanted to do in Fellowship of Churches is get other churches, more churches in New Pal involved with this fellowship. And we're always failing at this. We're never able to get more than just these few churches involved. And the biggest thing is like the churches are like, well, we already have our own service that day. Or, something like that. Well, no kidding, so do we. The point is getting together. But it's these brands, and it turns us into competitors instead of one body in Christ, like we hear about in Ephesians. Even our spirituality, our devotion to God can get corrupted by our brand loyalty, just like our families and churches can get broken apart by brand loyalties. Well, as we looked at last week, David's devotion to God became corrupted as he sat on the throne as king. Today we see how David taking Bathsheba, a married woman, and murdering her husband, Uriah. We see how that ends up. At the start of this passage, David's devotion to God has become so corrupt that he doesn't even realize that he's done anything wrong. Now, what brand is David loyal to? I don't know that this fits perfectly, but I'm not sure we can really label it as a brand. But clearly, David is devoted to the idea that he can do anything he wants as king, and that's something that comes along with being king. You get absolute authority, all-encompassing power to do whatever you want, and nobody can say a thing about it. His devotion to being the person and king that God made him to be kind of flew out the window. If we want to try to consider it a label, maybe we can say the crown or his throne or his palace. Or, it's some kind of image that fits into this worldview that he was taking on now that he'd become king. And he was more devoted to that than he was anymore to the Lord. Because he wears the crown, that comes with the belief system of what it means to be king. He can do whatever he wants without consequence. Whatever he says, whatever he does is right. The only real concern that he had was maintaining a good image among the people, and that comes down to maintaining power. That's not about what's right or wrong. He wasn't even remotely concerned with God's thoughts on the matter. Now, you can see David still in this kind of twisted worldview that he had taken on as being king, being so devoted to this idea he could do anything he wanted and not even think about it. As soon as Bathsheba finished her ritual time of mourning, David immediately takes Bathsheba as his wife. I mean, imagine how broken up in grief she must have still been after 1 week of losing her husband. So David immediately takes her as his wife, takes advantage of Uriah being dead, and swiftly covers up the fact that he got Bathsheba pregnant, outside of marriage and in adultery and all this kind of stuff. Now, he was so into having that crown on his head that he had no idea how sinful he was being, as if God would be on his side no matter what he did because he was king. And the king, after all, he's always had God's support in whatever he did. The difference this time being that David had never really acted this bad before. And Nathan the prophet, he gets the fortunate task, the blessing of getting to correct the king. God calls upon Nathan the prophet to call out David, and Nathan does so brilliantly. As mentioned in a commentary I read this week, I really agree with the idea that if Nathan just tried to tell David how wrong he was straight up to his, just call him out directly, it probably wouldn't have gone over so well. So Nathan tells this parable about the rich man and the poor man. The rich man having large flocks and herds, while the poor man had one precious little lamb. And the rich man steals the poor man's lamb, uses it as dinner for a guest. Now, upon hearing the parable, David still doesn't get it. He's still lost in his little worldview there. And he gets furious about what this guy did, because he still has a sense of right and wrong. He's just so lost in this worldview. He says, that man deserves to die. He shall pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity. Strong feelings over what's right and wrong. Yet, in David's now twisted worldview as king, he's unable to apply that lesson to his own life. He's unable to even understand how that story relates to his own life. And then that's when Nathan calls him out. That man is you, David. It's you. And then Nathan goes on to explain to David what God is saying here. God's saying, don't you remember I chose you? I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you Saul's house and his wives. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that weren't enough, I'd give you twice as much more. Nathan asks, why then have you flouted the command of the Lord and done something so displeasing to the Lord? You took Uriah's wife and you put Uriah to the sword. You took Bathsheba and killed Uriah. And then return, these sins of yours will come back around to haunt you and your family for generations to come. And now finally, this is the moment when David begins to understand what he's done. That aha moment. He realizes how rotten he's become as king. And with that, we finally reach something commendable about David. With Bathsheba and Uriah, he stands guilty before the Lord as though he's standing in a corner like the guy in the picture. Now, if you stand guilty of something, either you're proud of what you did or you messed up, right? In David's case, he finally realizes that he messed up. He doesn't defend it. He doesn't justify it. He doesn't think it was right. He admits to doing wrong. And to stand guilty, even though he's done something wrong, standing in guilt like that for the thing that you've done wrong, that implies that you stand for something. Unless you're standing for belief in what you did, that would mean that you are standing on what you believe in and this whatever thing that you committed, and you continue to stand for that. Or, as David's doing, standing guilty in this way, admitting the wrong you did, is a way of standing for what's right. It's a starting place to work on what's right. And since we've all got our own sins to reckon with, this, I think, is a very important lesson for us. Since so many of us have become more loyal to brands and ideas, certain things. And I mean, some of these brands and ideas, even more so than our families, even more so than our churches, enough to twist up our theology or our understanding and relationship with God. We ought to be able to relate to David's getting lost in this worldview of king that got him into that big mess with Bathsheba. Now, we all commit sins, right? There's no question about that. And at least we're together on that, that we're all together as sinful human beings. But that doesn't make those sins okay. Sure, God makes things okay with forgiveness and working with us to right the wrongs we've committed as a starting place to make things right. But I pray that we are able to distance ourselves a little more from our favorite brands and ideas that have messed with some of our minds and hearts and our faith. And I pray that we'll move a little more closely once again to the Lord where we know we need to be. To the presence of the Lord, to the teachings of the Lord, to the actions of the Lord, to who we are called to be in the Lord. And in return, as we are willing to stand guilty for any wrongs that we may have committed, whether we realized it or not, may we find forgiveness yet again. May we find God's grace once more. And may others all around us be blessed as we stand for what's right. As we work on training our minds to give some stronger signals to genuine love and life for all of creation.